Hey guys, it's Greg with the Apple Explained podcast. Today is Friday, August 28th, and we're going to talk about some really big news that's happened with Apple in the past week, starting off with Fortnite. Now, I haven't really publicly acknowledged the situation between Apple and Fortnite. I am in the process of making a video on my main Apple Explained channel, and I have addressed it in live streams, but I really want to take you through step by step on this epic little saga between Apple and Fortnite. Now, Fortnite is a game created by the company called Epic Games, and I first want to start off by saying that Epic Games and Apple actually go back. This is not the first time the two companies have interacted, and they've never interacted in this negative way. Back in, I believe it was 2010, let me check my sources here, I have this laid out. September 2010, there was an Apple event, and Epic Games was invited to show off something called Project Sword. It was a demo for a new game that would be released on iOS. Now, it was later called Infinity Blade, and you'll probably remember that game. It was pretty popular at the time. The graphics were really incredible, considering it was 2010. But there was another time when Epic Games was invited to an Apple event, and that was in June 2015. It was Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, and it was to demo Fortnite for the Mac. So these two companies are not strangers. They've worked together before. And Epic Games has developed for iOS, has developed for the Mac, has been on the App Store for years. It's just that recently they started having problems with the guidelines of the App Store. And it all started on June 30th of this year, because that's when they sent Apple an email asking for an exception to their guidelines. It was from Tim Sweeney, who is the founder and CEO of Epic Games, and he said, "We would like to offer consumers the following features. Number one, a competing payment processing option other than Apple payments without Apple's fees," they're referring to Apple's 30% cut, "in Fortnite and other Epic Games software distributed through the iOS App Store." So that's number one. They want their own payment processor, their own payment system, so they don't have to give Apple a 30% cut. Number two, they want a competing Epic Games Store app available through the iOS App Store and through direct installation that has equal access to the underlying operating system features as the App Store itself has. So what that means is they not only want Apple to give them permission to create their own payment processor, they also want permission to create their own App Store that runs on iOS, that has access to the same technology, the same tools as Apple's own native App Store. I mean, that's obviously that's never going to happen. Apple would never allow that to happen. But they sent this email off, and you'll find out why later on. It's just a blatant. It breaks Apple's guidelines. They want an exception, and you may be confused as to why they even sent this email, because Apple's going to say no. So why would you even try this? Well, we'll get to that later on. What happened next in this story is that Apple responded to Epic's email on July 10th, and it was a 6-page response from one of Apple's lawyers. And in that response was this quote: "The App Store is not simply a marketplace. It's part of a larger bundle of tools, technologies, and services that Apple makes available to developers." And that is true. I mean, you have to consider the App Store isn't just about the App Store isn't just a marketplace where people can download apps. Apple provides a lot of tools for developers to create their apps for free. Now, I know there's a $99 a year fee to be part of this developer community on iOS, but they don't charge for these individual technologies. And they gave an example in this email. They said, "Epic has made great use of Apple-provided tools such as Test Flight, VoIP, stickers, iCloud document storage, ARKit, messages extension, replay kit, and push notifications. These are all tools and technologies bundled into the App Store, which developers have access to. And that's not even considering that Apple is giving developers access to the iOS user base, one of the biggest communities of users in the world. Also, they talk about Metal. They say, quote, when Apple launched Metal for Mac at WWDC in 2015, which I just mentioned, Mr. Sweeney's colleague, Billy Bramer, stood on stage and explained how Metal revolutionized graphic design and enabled developers like us to create richer 3D worlds. Now, that's in reference of that appearance that Epic Games made to one of Apple's events back in 2015. And it's funny that Apple brings that up, because Epic Games didn't have a problem in 2010 with Apple's guidelines. They didn't have a problem in 2015 with Apple's guidelines, but suddenly in 2020, they have all these problems. They're leading this effort against Apple, and they're painting Apple as this Goliath, and they're this David figure coming in trying to slay this monolithic company that's just oppressing developers. So Apple sends that email to Epic, and then Epic responds on July 17th with another email. And this is from Tim Sweeney, and he basically says, it's a sad state of affairs that Apple's senior executives would hand Epic's sincere request off to Apple's legal team. I guess he wanted a personal response from Apple executives, but how can you expect that when it's clear what you're doing? It's clear that you're mounting a legal attack on Apple. It's clear you're laying the foundation for exactly what happened. And I mean, Apple smelt this from a mile away when they got this email. And also in Epic's response in this email, they said, if Apple someday chooses to return to its roots, building open platforms in which consumers have freedom to install software from sources of their choosing, and developers can reach customers and do business directly without intermediation, then Epic will once again be an ardent supporter of Apple. I found that to be very weird, because what exactly are they talking about? What are they referring to when they say if Apple someday chooses to return to its roots? If they're talking about macOS, the rules and guidelines of macOS has not changed. And when it comes to iOS, which I think is their main concern, I mean, that's what they're railing against, is the iOS App Store. The rules of the App Store has never changed since its inception in 2008. So I'm not sure what roots they're referring to. Also, they're saying, oh yeah, they mentioned this other thing where they say, we will continue to pursue this legally as we have done in the past to address other injustices in our industry. So they're really framing themselves as sort of like the justice warriors of the developer community. And I'm not sure what they're talking about. I don't know what they've done in the past to address other injustices. There was one lawsuit when I was researching that I found with a company called Silicon Knights, where they were using Epic's code in one of their games, and Epic responded to the lawsuit. I guess Silicon Knights tried suing Epic, saying that the code was the same, and then Epic said, no, they're actually turning this whole thing around on us. They stole our code to begin with. And then Silicon Knights went bankrupt because Epic's lawsuit was successful. So that's the only thing I can think of. They don't really have a reputation, though, of fighting all these justice battles with oppressive companies. But this is not when things went public. When things really hit the fan was when Epic launched their direct payment processor that they had mentioned to Apple they wanted in the email. That happened on August 13th. They actually implemented their own payment processor in Fortnite, where customers could buy the virtual currency of that game, they could buy the skins, they could buy whatever items are offered in Fortnite, and bypass Apple's payment processor, which means Apple doesn't get their 30% cut, which means Epic is violating the App Store guidelines. And guess what? Their app was removed by Apple. An hour after they implemented that payment processor, Apple removed the app. And this is when the PR campaign began. This is when Fortnite released that 1980 Fortnite video ad painting Apple as, you know, if you don't know, that video was actually a spoof of Apple's 1984 ad where Apple painted IBM as the monopoly of the computer market, and Apple was represented by this woman in these red shorts and an Apple shirt. Tank top was like an Apple tank top. She comes running into this room where there's a big screen of a man's face, and she throws this sledgehammer into the screen and breaks it. They did a spoof off of that, except there was an apple on the screen. It looked very similar to Tim Cook. And then a Fortnite character comes running in and throws a sledgehammer into it. It's a stretch, and they're really forcing this narrative that they are a fledgling company. They are this small developer who's being oppressed. And in my opinion, it's not even comparable to the IBM Apple situation in the 80s. Because I think the last time I checked, Epic's valuation was at $2 billion. That's not a small developer. That is a big company worth billions of dollars, with hundreds of employees, maybe even thousands. I didn't look that up. But this is not, a startup. And it's interesting how focused Epic is on making this public. Usually, companies are suing each other all the time. Apple's suing people. They recently sued a company in Silicon Valley that was using a pear as their logo, and I think the company was called Prepared, and the logo, I guess, in Apple's opinion, looked similar to Apple's own logo, and Apple sued them. Now, Apple is not making this public. They're not running these videos. They're not publishing these tweets. They're not coming out with these articles saying they're taking on companies that are stealing their branding or something like that. And that's typically not what companies do. But I think in this case with Fortnite, it's very important that they publicize this case because they know they will lose. Fortnite knows the law is not on their side on this. In fact, the judge that's overseeing this case is the same one that oversaw a case with Apple when they were sued. I believe it was 2017. I think it was 3 years ago. Apple was sued for something similar. It was with the App Store, saying that because of Apple's 30% cut, customers are paying more. They're paying an inflated price for in-app purchases. And that is unlawful, or that's a monopoly, or that's illegal. I think that's what the company was arguing. Now, of course, they lost that lawsuit against Apple because they couldn't prove it, or that behavior is not illegal. And Fortnite knows they're in the same situation. And as I said before, the judge that decided that case in 2017 is the same judge that will decide this Fortnite case in 2020, which is very interesting. And I just can't see this going in Fortnite's favor legally. But what could happen, and I think what Fortnite is hoping for, is that they may lose the court of law, but they will win in the court of public opinion. And that's very, very important, because some things can change in the court of public opinion. If Epic is successful in painting Apple as this evil corporation that's oppressing its developers, and people turn on Apple, if gamers turn on Apple, if iOS users turn on Apple, Fortnite could force their hand to roll back some of these guidelines just for the sake of PR reasons, just for the sake of the public relation image, of making their consumers happy, of not looking like this evil corporation. The problem is, it doesn't appear to be gaining traction. A lot of people who are reading these articles, a lot of people who are commenting on these YouTube videos that Fortnite is putting out, are saying, look, these are two corporations who are trying to be as greedy as possible, as most private corporations are, trying to make as much money for themselves as possible. They recognize the sort of hypocrisy of Epic, that they've been okay with these rules, they've adhered to these guidelines for years, and then they wrote Apple this email asking for a side deal. Actually, Tim Sweeney responded to this accusation, saying that Epic wanted a special deal just for themselves. He said, "Oh no, in that email I mentioned that we hope Apple can implement these guidelines for all iOS developers." And he does say that in the email, but it's important to understand the context, because he says that, I believe, in the last one or two paragraphs of the entire email. And the first thing he does is he outlines what he wants Apple to do for Epic. He doesn't say he wants every iOS developer to have their own app store on iOS. He says he wants Epic to have their own app store on iOS. He says he wants Epic to have their own payment processor, and doesn't mention other developers until at the very end of the email. But anyway, that's a whole nother deal. But I don't think it's going well. There are people in the gaming community, I think, that are more likely to take Epic's side, just because there is a little bit of animosity toward Apple in the gaming community to begin with. But iOS users in general like Apple. They like Apple products, they like the App Store, and they aren't as likely to buy into this idea that Apple is this evil company. So the most recent updates to this saga is that the judge overseeing this case decided that Fortnite cannot force Apple to adhere to their demands. So she's already ruled that. Now, I believe that's, I don't know what that's called. It's not a temporary ruling, but just an immediate ruling for those things. And I think there's more details that have to be sorted out. It hasn't ended yet. But what Apple did is they countersued Epic. They said Epic can no longer have access to their developer tools on iOS. And that includes the Unreal Engine, which Epic created for not only their games, but other developers' games that are using that engine to power their apps. So Apple said, we're cutting you off, Epic, from all your developer tools at the end of this month. And the judge said, Apple, you can't do that because it is affecting other developers. It doesn't have anything to do directly with this case. It was just sort of a retaliation from Apple, I think, to force Epic's hand, to put Epic in a very uncomfortable situation and force them to adhere to the guidelines again, which is, I wouldn't say it's dirty, but Apple is leveraging their position to force Fortnite to adhere to the guidelines. But the judge said, Apple, you can't do that. So Apple is no longer doing that, but Epic still hasn't gotten their way. So we have yet to see the final say. There's more information. There's more stories coming out every day about this case. And it's really exciting. We haven't really seen something dramatic like this in the tech community for a really, really long time. And I can't wait to see how it ends. I just can't believe how Fortnite has been pushing on this PR aspect. And it just makes it very obvious that they know they're going to lose legally, but they really want to win in the court of public opinion. And we'll just see how that plays out. All right, enough about Fortnite. How long did I go on about that? For 19 minutes? Oh my God. We need to talk about something else. Also in Apple news this week, Apple CEO Tim Cook donated $5 million in stock to charity. Now the fact that this podcast is called Apple Explained and this is basically a fluff piece, but I'm not trying to make this a fluff piece. I understand Tim Cook is a billionaire and $5 million may not seem like a lot, but I don't really like to frame it that way. I really think any money donated to a charity is a good thing, no matter how rich someone is. And you have to keep in mind, Apple has never really been this focused on charity work before. Especially under Steve Jobs, there was no program that we see under Tim Cook. Tim Cook started the charity matching program where when employees would donate to a charity, Apple would match that amount to that same charity up to, I believe, $10,000 per person annually. That was a really big deal, and I applaud Tim Cook for implementing that program because I don't think Steve Jobs ever would. He was not the most charitable person. And I think this is just a good opportunity. I wanted to use this article about Tim Cook's donation just as a jumping off point to talk about other things that I think should be talked about Tim Cook, because he doesn't get very much credit, I think, compared to Steve Jobs. I've mentioned this before, especially in live streams, but the thing about Steve Jobs is that he was the most charismatic person I think the corporate world has ever seen. His presentations, his style, everything about him was just to die for. I mean, you could easily fall for his personality on stage, and no one can compete with that. No one can fill those shoes. But the difference is, Tim Cook's strengths are only visible behind the scenes. He doesn't have that public charisma that gets people to fall in love with him. What he has are a certain set of skills, if I can put it that way, that he implements behind the scenes, sort of in the business aspect of Apple, that have been paying off incredibly well. And those skills, number one, is his management of people. I think he does an incredible job managing his people at Apple to ensure products are made efficiently, but that products are made to the best of their ability. Samsung is a great example of how to do this poorly. I believe Samsung has talented workers. The problem is the management does not understand how to take advantage of those skills and allow them to create the products that they potentially could create, that are potentially great. And we saw this even in Apple. I don't even have to use Samsung as an example. When Steve Jobs was gone in the 90s, Apple was creating some of the worst products ever in their history, despite many of the same talented people like Jonathan Ive being at Apple during that time. They were not creating great products. And Jonathan Ive has said he wasn't allowed to create the computers he wanted. It wasn't like under Steve Jobs, where he had the freedom to really flex his design skills like he had in the past. So anyway, Tim Cook not only has this management skill, he also has a logistical skill that I think is why Steve Jobs wanted him to join Apple so badly in the first place in the late 90s. Tim Cook was working at Compaq at the time. Compaq was basically the Microsoft or the Apple of today. They were dominating the computer industry in the 90s, and Apple was on the brink of bankruptcy. I mean, you really have to understand that. And Tim Cook left his executive position at Compaq to join Apple, a company about to die. And that decision in itself, I think, goes against all these people's criticisms of Tim Cook, because they say, oh, Tim is a bean counter. He's just a numbers guy. He doesn't really care about the product. He doesn't have the passion that it takes to create great, innovative products. And I would say, hold your horses. Let's take a look at his past. Let's take a look at the evidence. A numbers guy, a purely analytical person, would not have made that jump from Compaq, one of the biggest, most profitable companies at the time, to one of the least profitable companies at the time, who in fact wasn't making a profit at the time, was about to go bankrupt. It takes a person with a certain intuition, with a certain passion for what they're doing in their life. And I think he deserves credit for that. Also, if Tim Cook was purely a numbers guy, purely cared about profit or revenue or whatever that people are saying he is, he would not have canceled that Air Power project in 2017, or that was started in 2017, canceled in 2018, I believe. As you know, Apple was going to create a wireless charger, and It was called AirPower. Apple introduced it on stage with the introduction of the iPhone 7 and AirPods. They were focusing on this whole wireless, experience. And Apple hadn't made the product yet, but believed they were capable of making it. So they introduced it, said it would be released. I think it was at the beginning of 2018. They didn't make that deadline. They pushed it back. They didn't make the second deadline, and eventually released a statement saying, we cannot make this product. We thought we could, but there were issues that we couldn't overcome, and we didn't want to release a substandard product. And you have to keep in mind, it costs money to develop projects like that. And AirPower was already so far along. Apple had already sunk a lot into research and development. They had sunk in a lot of just manpower and time into the AirPower project. And it probably cost millions of dollars. And Tim Cook was willing to lose all of that money, not only the money they had already put into the project, but all the potential revenue of releasing a wireless charging pad. I mean, they could have released a wireless charging pad, just not capable of what they had originally planned. Maybe they could have done the 3-coil setup like what Nomad does with their chargers. And they could have thrown in a little, Apple Watch charger there. And they could have called it a day and still charged, $150, $200 for it. And it would have sold because it's Apple, because it would have had a good design, etc. And Tim Cook could have not only made back the money they put into the project, but made a substantial profit. But he said no, because he truly, truly does care about the quality of product that Apple releases. And I would say, honestly, I would go out on a limb and say the products Apple has released in the past 9 years since Tim Cook has been CEO. By the way, it's been officially 9 years. 4 days ago, August 24th, was Tim Cook's official 9-year anniversary as CEO of Apple. And during that time, there has been no product release that has been a flop, or that has been discontinued, or that has been a disappointment. And I would say take a look at Steve Jobs' tenure. Take a look at the Steve Jobs era. There were quite a few products that were released that were, I wouldn't say they were bad products, but they didn't sell well. Customers didn't appreciate it. For example, the Power Mac G4 Cube was a beautiful computer. Very small. It was an 8-inch cube. It had the power of the Power Mac G4, which was 4 times as large. It had no fan, so it was super quiet. The problem was it was substantially more expensive than the Power Mac G4, so it didn't sell. Power users don't really care much about the size of their tower computer, which is either going to be sitting under their desk or on top of their desk. Anyway, it's not like you're carrying the thing around. It's also worth considering the iMac mouse. The original iMac had that hockey puck mouse, which customers hated. Apple replaced that. The iPod Hi-Fi, the stereo system Apple released, was also under Steve Jobs. That was discontinued after just, I think, like 16 or 18 months of being on the market. Now, you could say the Mac Pro, the trash can Mac Pro, was a flop. You could say that, but that's only one product. And it's unreasonable to say there was nothing bad that happened under Steve Jobs. Anyway, now we're getting into this whole debate of Steve Jobs versus Tim Cook, which is something people ask me a lot. And that's really my opinion on it. People say, if Steve Jobs had still been CEO, would Apple be a better company today? Or what would Apple be like today? Would Apple be different? And I say, of course, there would be ways in which Apple is different, because a different person would be running the company. But I think people put a lot of emphasis on the CEO position without recognizing the underlying philosophy of Apple, because that's what's truly, truly important. People make the mistake of thinking when Steve Jobs was forced out of the company in 1985 and they went downhill for the next decade, people think it's because Steve Jobs wasn't there. But that's actually a fallacy. Steve Jobs' philosophy left Apple with Steve Jobs. The philosophy Steve Jobs instilled into Apple was not practiced by Gil Amelio. It was not practiced by John Scully. It was not practiced by the CEOs that replaced Steve Jobs. That's why Apple suffered. But that philosophy was reinstated when Steve Jobs returned in 1996, I believe. And it's been deeply embedded into the company ever since. I mean, it's why Apple bounced back. It's why Apple grew so quickly. It's why Apple is on top today. It's because of that philosophy. Now, it doesn't take Steve Jobs to practice that philosophy. Anyone who truly understands it can practice it. They're just going to practice it in their own unique way, in their own unique style. But it's not such a dramatic difference that they're releasing terrible products now under someone else. And we're seeing that different style under Tim Cook with, again, his approach to charity, something Steve Jobs never really worried about. His approach to human rights, something Steve Jobs never really worried about or spoke on. His approach to the environment, which, yes, I understand Apple already had a pretty good environmental effort under Steve Jobs, but Tim Cook took that to a whole nother level. I mean, under Tim Cook, Apple went carbon neutral. Under Tim Cook, Apple's going to go carbon neutral not just for the immediate company and the headquarters. They're going to go carbon neutral for the entire footprint of the company, including suppliers, including manufacturing, including the lifetime of the product, carbon neutral. And that is such an ambitious goal, something no other company has ever tried to achieve. And I think it's because that's so important to Tim Cook that Apple is leading the effort. So I don't think Apple is a better company today or a worse company today because Tim Cook is CEO. I think they're a different company. And you just have to realize, I mean, I have this written in the show notes here. Apple's share price passed the $500 mark this past week. They passed $2 trillion. And like what? I think it was just a year ago. I think it was a year ago when they passed $1 trillion valuation. Now they're at $2 trillion. They've doubled that. Apple's growth is astonishing. The success of their recent products has been astonishing. Now people will say there hasn't been like an iPhone release under Tim Cook. He hasn't had his big like world-changing product release yet. And I would agree. But that's not because Tim Cook isn't a product person or he's not focused on innovation. It's just not that time yet. You know what I mean? If Steve Jobs could have released the iPhone in 1999, I'm sure he would have liked to. But it just wasn't the time for that technology. And I think we will see an iPhone level release under Tim Cook. And I believe it's going to come in the form of augmented reality and perhaps virtual reality technology. It could come in the form of glasses. I really think if Apple creates glasses, it would mean that they executed it very well. Because if you think about it, Apple is always working on products. I mean, Apple was rumored to be working on a TV, they were rumored to be working on a car, they were rumored to be working on all these different things, but they never see the light of day. Because unlike Google, unlike Samsung, who just sort of throws ideas at the wall, brings it to market, even if it's not a great product, they just kind of see what's going to hit and what's going to miss. Whatever hits, we're going to focus on. Whatever misses, we'll just discontinue it. Apple really doesn't work that way. If they release a product, if they bring it to market, just like, I mean, AirPower is a great example. They will not bring it to market unless they can execute on it the way they want. It has to be great or else they're not doing it. That's something I respect so much about Apple. That's something I wish other companies would do. And a great example is not only AirPower, but the Apple Watch. I mean, Apple had been rumored to be working on a watch, I think since 2012. Those rumors started swirling. And in 2013, Samsung beat Apple to the market. Samsung released the Galaxy Gear smartwatch, the first generation model, in 2013. That's 2 years before the Apple Watch. Now, Samsung likes to be first to market. Samsung likes to sort of have the bragging rights of having more advanced technology or being more innovative. But that's not what that's not what creating a product is about. It's not about being first. It's about creating a great user experience. And Apple did not release a smartwatch until they could ensure a great user experience. And what happened in that scenario? I don't know if you guys know this, but that first generation Samsung Galaxy Gear smartwatch had a 30% return rate at Best Buy. 30% of customers who bought their Galaxy Gear watch from Best Buy returned it because they didn't like the experience. That return rate is unheard of. I have never heard of a product getting returned at that high of a rate before. And just go back and look at the reviews of that Galaxy Gear first generation model. They were awful. Everyone, all reviewers were saying that this ain't it. And then Apple waited a couple more years, waited for that technology to mature, waited for it to be executed well. And then boom, Apple Watch, the most successful smartwatch in the world, the best-selling watch, period, in the world. I mean, take away the smart label. The Apple Watch is the best-selling watch in the world. That is unbelievable. And I remember back in 2015, when I believe Jonathan Ive said, Swiss watchmakers should be worried. And people made fun of him for saying that. I believe one of the Swiss, I forget which company it was, but one of the Swiss watch manufacturers came out and said, we don't compete with the Apple Watch because we're not in the technology business. We're in the jewelry business. So we're not worried about the Apple Watch. And that was a mistake because what Jonathan Ive understood, what Apple understood, is that we only have two wrists. And yeah, you can put a watch on both wrists, but that's kind of weird. You can put two watches on one wrist, but that's kind of weird. But basically, we only have room. When we have a watch, we're only having one. It's not like headphones where you can have multiple pairs for multiple different purposes. I suppose you can have a watch. Maybe if you're going out on the town, you're going to wear your nice, Rolex. And then for day-to-day activities, you can wear your Apple Watch. That may happen in very niche scenarios, but it's not the rule. It's not what happens most of the time. And what happened is the Apple Watch did affect sales of Swiss watchmakers. And when you get used to the convenience of a smartwatch, you start to realize, yeah, that Rolex looks good. Yes, it's built well. It's a nice piece of jewelry. But man, I love the convenience of a smartwatch. And I don't know how I ended up... Oh, right, because I was talking about Apple Glass. Okay. I just go off on these side rants. And totally forget the topic I was on. But I was talking about the Apple Glass and how that has the potential to be Tim Cook's world-changing product. Because if you really think about it, I do think Apple can do it. I know Google tried to do it and it was a failure, and so that made people think, okay, maybe glasses is not a good product to focus on. Maybe it's not what people are going to use in the future. But just like the original Galaxy Gear smartwatch failed, that doesn't mean the entire smartwatch industry is the wrong direction. It just means they didn't execute it properly. So when Apple does release glasses, it has the potential to cannibalize sales of the iPhone. Just like when the iPhone was released, it cannibalized sales of the iPod because the iPhone had all the functionality of an iPod plus more. Apple Glass has the potential to have all the capabilities of an iPhone plus more. And if Apple can do AR well, I mean, the potential of it, the potential of the technology is incredible. I mean, imagine putting on glasses that overlay your environment with a digital interface. Suddenly, you're getting directions to a restaurant with a path. And instead of having to look at the path on your phone and try and figure out where to turn, you're going to see that path overlaid on the sidewalk. And you'll know exactly where to go. I think it has a potential to be indistinguishable from your real environment. I mean, just look at the AR technology. Look at ARKit that Apple's created. Developers were able to create these incredible, realistic environments so quickly with the early technology. This is just the beginning of AR technology. And just imagining, instead of a notification appearing at the top of your phone's display and having to turn on your phone to see it or look at your watch, it's overlaid in your environment, and you have a notification appearing in the upper right side of your view. You know what I mean? Just it's embedded in your environment, which I think will be the next big era of technology. It'll be the next big leap. There was the internet revolution of the 2000s. There was the touch screen revolution, of the late 2000, getting into the 2010s, where touch screens are being put on everything, totally transforming the way we interact with our devices, transforming the way we use products. There will be an AR revolution, and I think that will mark the end of touchscreens, or at least make them more niche than they are today, just like with the iPod. And I think that's what Apple is gearing up for. They have been so laser focused on AR for years. We saw it with the first version of ARKit. We saw it, I believe that was iOS 13 or iOS 12 was when Apple started focusing on augmented reality. And I do believe they're building a product around it. And I think Tim Cook has the management skills. He has the understanding of how to create a revolutionary product. He just has to prove it. And that will be a revolutionary product. Apple will do it well because he's already proved that he's focused on the right things in a product. He's not focused on being first to market. He's not focused on these superficial aspects of products. He is focused on creating a great user experience, and that is why people love Apple. That's why they buy an iPhone and they don't go back to Android, or they then go and buy a Mac, or they then go and buy an Apple Watch or AirPods. They know that when they're buying a product from Apple, they're going to have a good experience. Or at least, much more often than buying something from Samsung or Microsoft or Google. All right, that's all I have to say about Tim Cook and Steve Jobs, and a little bit of virtual reality talk in there. Now I want to focus on something that may not be big news, but I just think is incredible. Apple opened this store in Singapore. It's the third retail store they have in the city, and it's the first Apple store to be on the water. It's literally a dome. It's like a sphere, aluminum sphere, floating on the water in Singapore. I've had a favorite Apple store before, probably the Fifth Avenue Apple store in New York City. This might be my new favorite Apple store. I love Apple retail. I think they are the best at retail of any company in the world. They have stunning stores, stunning. The fact that Microsoft tried to compete and failed is very satisfying to me, to be honest. Now, I know people were saying Microsoft really wasn't trying to compete with Apple on retail, and they were just trying to have a presence to compete with Apple in the minds of consumers, and they didn't actually intend for their Microsoft stores to make money. And that may be true. That may be true. The question is, why couldn't they? That's the real question. What was holding Microsoft back? What skills did they lack that they couldn't compete with Apple in retail? That they couldn't make a profit off of their retail stores? It's really interesting. If you look up all of the Microsoft retail store locations and all of the Apple Store retail locations, it's almost an identical map. Because what Microsoft was doing is they were looking at where Apple had their stores, and buying up retail space as close to those locations as possible. And I think it's an interesting strategy. In one way, it looks bad because they just appear to be a follower. They just appear to be copying Apple. In another way, they're sort of giving customers a choice. I mean, look, you saw our store and you see Apple's store. They're sort of, equating their brand with Apple. And I can see the strategy there, how it can pay off. The problem was, what's the purpose of a retail store? It's to buy products. It's to test out products. That's why Apple opened retail stores in the first place, because they were not able to connect with customers in retail the way they wanted it through their little store within a store model. Because before Apple retail stores, they did try putting like Apple sections into places like Micro Center and other big box retailers. They still do it to this day, but it didn't work nearly as well back then. And the associates working at those big box stores didn't know much about Apple's products, and they were much more likely to recommend the PCs because that's what they were familiar with. And there really wasn't a program in place to educate associates on Apple products to know when to recommend them to customers, or even to know how to explain those products to customers. So when Apple did it, because Apple understood they had great products, they just had to figure out a way to tell customers about it. And so when they opened their retail stores, they were very successful because they had those great products. Microsoft is not really a product-oriented company anymore. Well, honestly, they never were. Microsoft has always been a software company. Ever since, they made Windows, it's the software operating system. They made Office, that's software. They also have cloud services now that make up the bulk of their revenue, like Azure and there's a different cloud service they offer to businesses. Microsoft makes most of their money from business to business sales than business to customer sales. So my question is, why did they start the whole retail effort to begin with? If they're not focused on hardware, if they're not focused on products, I think there may have been a strategy change when their leadership changed from Steve Ballmer to Satya Nadella, their current CEO. And that may have been where things went wrong. I'm just not sure what Microsoft was trying to do. I'm not sure if they were trying to have a retail presence to compete with Apple and get their brand into the minds of customers so that they're more likely to buy PCs and therefore use Windows. I mean, I'm really not sure, because their hardware efforts have always been terrible. The Zune was a failure. The Windows Phone was a failure. They're trying to do these Surface notebooks where they're like combining a tablet and a notebook together into one, and it's just not selling very well, and they're not making much money from it. They have this new Surface Duo smartphone tablet combo they're doing now, which is interesting. And you know what? I will give Microsoft credit. I just don't want to bash them. I will give Microsoft credit. There was a time when Microsoft simply copied everything Apple did. When it came to hardware, when it came to software, they would just copy Apple. And it was a meme. It was really frustrating for Apple users. And even with their retail stores, if you look at Microsoft's retail store layout, the design, the look, I mean, they obviously copied Apple's original retail store design. Now, Apple left Microsoft in the dust when it came to retail because they moved on from that original design and updated it and made it look way cooler, way more modern. And of course, Microsoft was stuck with a more outdated style that they copied from Apple. But today, I will say Microsoft is doing their own thing. And I think that deserves some respect. I appreciate that they're taking a unique approach to their hardware. They're combining tablets and computers, something Apple doesn't do, so they're not copying Apple. They're doing their own thing. They're really executing on their own strategy. And even though it's not paying off as well as Apple's strategy, I do respect that they're going their own way now, and they're not just copying every single thing Apple does. Anyway, look up this picture of this Apple Marina Bay Sands store in Singapore. It's absolutely beautiful. I would love to just take a trip to Singapore just to see this store in person. That's how gorgeous it is. And it's on the water. I mean, how can you not want to go if it's on the water? All right, now the last thing I want to talk about today is this rumor that the iPhone 12 will be shipped without a charger and without headphones. I know I made a whole video about this on my YouTube channel, and I know you've probably heard a lot of people talking about it, and it's kind of old news now. But the reason why I want to bring it up is because there has been another round of rumors saying, yes, Apple is going to remove the charger. Now, when I say charger, I mean the wall adapter, not the charging cable. The charging cable will still be included. Apple supposedly is removing the wall adapter, which is that plastic little box that you plug into the wall, and the headphones, the earpods. This is according to a Taiwanese company called TrendForce. And they're saying that the iPhone 12 will be more expensive to produce because of the 5G capability, and that removing the accessories is one way that Apple is reducing costs of this phone, which I understand. But when they release this phone, and if they do mention that it won't be including headphones and it won't be including a wall adapter, they're not going to say, oh yeah, we're removing these accessories to save money on manufacturing this phone. They're going to put their own Apple spin on it, and it's definitely going to be for environmental reasons. I mean, I'm kind of torn on this. I don't want to say I'm happy that Apple's going to be removing these accessories. I really don't care about the headphones. I've never used those wired headphones. I think most people now have wireless earbuds. I understand I'm talking from a US perspective. Countries like India still use wired headphones much more than wireless. So I understand that they would be very upset about Apple removing the headphones. But I am concerned about the wall adapter. I do use the wall adapter. I think a lot of people do. The flip side is that those wall adapters, the plastic that it's made out of, is a very unique plastic. What is it called? I made a whole video about this. Duraset? Oh, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's a super hard, super durable plastic that is extremely resistant to melting, to being remolded, and to being recycled. And the reason why Apple uses that plastic on their wall chargers is because if it overheats, if it catches on fire, if it melts or explodes, that damage will be contained as much as possible to inside the wall adapter itself and not start a fire or harm the user. The problem is it's not recyclable, as I said. And Apple ships a ton. I mean, they shipped, I think, 189 million iPhones just in 2019. And yes, iPhones are recyclable. Apple makes iPhones out of recyclable materials like aluminum, but they can't help but make the wall adapters out of this plastic, which is not recyclable. And they will probably tout the benefits of removing the accessories because of the environmental impact they have. They'll probably say, we're going to be reducing our carbon footprint by this percent, or they'll say, we're removing this many pounds of e-waste every year. And they do have a point. Yes, they do have a point. But primarily, I think Apple is making this decision to reduce costs, not primarily for environmental reasons. Also, when it comes to the accessories included with the iPhone 12, they will carry through that environmental friendliness to the charging cable, because the charging cables today are made from plastic. And plastic is not very environmentally friendly, obviously. So what they'll do is likely, based on rumors, they will change the material of their charging cable from plastic to a braided fabric, which is recyclable. Also, I think it'll make it more durable. I wish they started doing this sooner, honestly, because Apple has always had problems with the durability of their charging cables going back like decades. Going back deep into Apple's history, people have complained about charging cables fraying and breaking and splitting very easily. Now, there was something else I was going to say. Oh, people actually have been kind of skeptical about the transition to fabric cables. But actually, Apple has already done this. They did it with the HomePod. If you have a HomePod, you were probably surprised when you unboxed it because the charging cable, or the power cable that plugs into it, is made from a fabric. I think it'll be the same exact type on the iPhone 12, so it won't be anything it really won't be out of the ordinary. And I wouldn't be surprised if they carry this through to their other products. I mean, they have it for the HomePod, they're going to have it for the iPhone 12, they'll probably bring it to the MacBook Air, then they'll bring it to the MacBook Pro, then they'll bring it to the Mac Pro. I mean, I can see them doing this across their entire product line, which is something Apple tends to do when they make changes like this. All right, that is everything I wanted to talk about this week. There were a couple things I didn't get to mention, like Apple confirmed the iPhone SE is now assembled in India for local customers. So hopefully, if you are listening and you are living in India, the price of the iPhone SE should be going down. I really think it should be more affordable because Apple won't be paying those tariffs like they were before when they assembled the iPhone SE outside of India. I also want to mention Apple is moving their manufacturing out of China. They are diversifying their manufacturing more than ever before. There's already been confirmation that they're moving factories from China to, I believe it's Taiwan and the Philippines. I'm not sure if that's right, but there are two other companies in two other countries in Asia. They're also moving a lot of manufacturing to India. Now, this is really good. I've always felt like it just made me very anxious that all of Apple's manufacturing virtually was in China. It just gives China so much power over American companies. It can be a little dangerous. And we've seen, how China's power, how they've been leveraging it. And although Tim Cook is so gung-ho about human rights, he hasn't talked about the human rights abuses happening in China. But although he hasn't said anything publicly, I do think Apple moving out of China, not everything, but a portion of their manufacturing moving out of China, is sort of his own statement. Like, yes, I recognize what's going on is not right. I recognize there are human rights abuses going on in China. The problem is I can't really speak about it publicly because we have too much invested in China right now. But here's a sign. Here's a sign that we understand what's happening. Here's a sign that we are going to try our best to limit our influence in China by moving as much manufacturing out as possible. I think we're going to continue to see that. I think we're going to continue to see Apple trying to make things in other countries. And that's a really good thing for Apple. It's a really good thing for the U.S. Hopefully they can move some things, some manufacturing to the U.S. But we really do have a problem here with not having the infrastructure to build 100 million devices a year. Tim Cook said himself, you can fill hundreds of stadiums worth of factory workers in China. You can't really do that here. We don't have that workforce. We don't have that infrastructure. We don't have that in place. Maybe we can develop it, but that would take a while. I'm just glad Apple is focusing on moving manufacturing out of China and into countries like India, where I do think it's not only a good investment, but it'll allow those products to be more affordable. And because they're moving into countries like India, they are now building retail stores in those countries. India is getting its first official Apple store, and that is so wonderful. I've had Apple users in India write to me all the time saying, can you make a video about the situation of being an Apple user in India? Because they were suffering from these long wait times for repairs, struggling to even find an authorized repair center to fix their devices, repair costs being sky high, products being super expensive in those countries because the price is inflated due to tariffs and import taxes. So hopefully we'll start to see those issues being remedied. I'm really excited about that. All right, guys, thank you for watching. I'm so used to doing YouTube videos. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you had a great week, and I'll check in with you with more of top news about Apple going on next week, next Friday.